Have you ever thought, is this just me when struggling to stay organized, start tasks, or manage time? For those of us over 50, these challenges might not be just aging. They could be ADHD hiding in plain sight for decades. I'm Jami Shapiro, host of Grandma Has ADHD, and I'm building a community where your experiences matter. Whether you're diagnosed, questioning, or simply curious, you're not alone. Our Facebook group is filled with vibrant, understanding people over 50 who share their stories, strategies, and yes, even their struggles, with plenty of laughter along the way. Ready to find your people? Join our growing Grandma Has ADHD Facebook community. Please like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone, because ADHD doesn't have an age limit, and neither does understanding yourself better. Together, we're changing the conversation about ADHD after 50. Come be part of the story. Okay. Hello, and welcome to the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. I am excited to be joined from across the continent in Brisbane, Australia, by Monica Hassall. And she is an ADHD and executive functioning coach in Brisbane, Australia. Initially with a nursing and then corporate medical sales background, her coaching journey started in 2012 when her husband, Jonathan, and she created Connect ADHD Coaching. She has presented at the International Conference for ADHD in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and at the Australian ADHD Conference in 2019 and 2022. Wow, that's quite a lot. She has been published in Attitude Magazine and twice in Attention Magazine, and she loves connecting with parents of kids with ADHD. She also runs a live ADHD parenting program, as well as working with adults. She works with high school students with neurodiversity, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorder. Wow, welcome. Oh, and her goal is to curate knowledge, to work closely with her clients, incorporating information and practices from a variety of sources, current neuroscience, traditional wisdoms, Eastern philosophy, mindfulness, and coaching principles. Welcome. That was quite a bit.
Oh, hey, Jami. So lovely to meet you. I think this is a wonderful podcast, and I was so excited when you reached out.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, so I reached out to a lot of the other presenters who did TED Talks and are involved in the ADHD space. And so Monica, I remembered, sent me a lovely email. And one of the things that you shared with me was that I had commented in one of my podcasts that I preferred the surrender experiment to the Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and how she just felt we had so much in common. And as you guys who listen to this podcast know, I don't do a lot of pre-interviewing. I like to have really spontaneous conversation that are exciting for you and exciting for me, because if I were to rehearse it, then I just get nervous, and I don't want that. So hello.
Hello.
So you also have ADHD?
That's an interesting question. My husband has ADHD. He reckons I'm one half tick box away from it. But as many women with ADHD, you may not fit in line with the criteria or, the assessment process. I know I grew up in a very ADHD family. So my husband said, you're probably more ADHD adjacent, because we know it's highly heritable. I certainly don't tick all the criteria, but if you saw my office, you'd think she's got ADHD, but my husband has ADHD and his office is meticulous.
Yeah, I actually would say that I don't fit all the criteria either. And one of the things that I always say is, you meet one person with ADHD, you meet one person with ADHD. And, that's why so many people think, oh, I can't have it because I can sit still. Well, that may mean that you're not hyperactive, but, how is your brain when you're sitting down trying to read that book that you're not interested in, right? So when you say you have a family with ADHD, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in a really big family, one of 6 kids, and a super loving family. And looking back at my dad, unfortunately, my mum and dad have both passed away.
I'm
Whereas
sorry.
I would even think that my father passed away as a result of his ADHD from impulsivity. He lived across the road and was sadly, in a pedestrian accident. To me, looking back at his life, particularly after we were cleaning up the house, I would see all these little signs, lots of clutter, lots of love of paper piles everywhere. The most generous man you could ever find. And these little, in fact, my husband often would refer to my mother as the source, the source of ADHD. So again, very creative, beautiful soul. We didn't live in a hoarding situation, but there was more clutter. There's a lot of emotional regulation and very busy brains. So very loving, a little bit chaotic.
That sounds like my children's experience growing up with me. And interesting, I have a mother and a father with ADHD. They did not stay married, and we did not know my mom had ADHD until just under 2 years ago. But to your point about your dad, and I'm so sorry about that, my half brother was diagnosed in the 1980s. And he was the stereotypical poster child with, the hyperactivity. And I can remember, so I didn't know that I had ADHD until the age of 45. So I remember my brother, 12 years my junior, I was probably 20 years old. He's about 8. And we're like going to the mall or we're going somewhere. And I remember we're at a traffic light, like a cross signal, and I had to pull him back from going into the street. So when my ex-husband said that I had ADHD, I was like, no, that's ADHD, not this. And I don't know how old you are, because you said you're kind of like on the tick. And I love the way that you said it. Say it again with like your one tick away.
One half tick box away from a diagnosis, half tick box away, but I'm actually turned 60 this year. So,
wow. That's amazing. So I would imagine then for you that the very least menopause or perimenopause has kicked in.
Yeah. Well, think it's about engineering the environment too. And that's one of my messages to my clients. Can't keep it all in here. You have to engineer the environment.
Right. The scaffolding. That's definitely something that I have realized for myself is I build that scaffolding, like for instance, I always wear my smartwatch now. Where was going to be a distraction? Yeah. But it's become my second brain. So anyway, I want to know what an internal pharmacy is.
Well, an internal pharmacy is having agency over our own body and brain chemistry. I came up with this idea once, and I learn a lot from my clients. They're amazing. We had this one young man who was 23, and he was staying up till 2:00 in the morning, having to wake up at 6:00 in the morning to get to work. And he was prescribed medication, stimulants, and he would take more stimulants than what he was prescribed in the morning to wake him up. And then 3 weeks later, he'd run out of his script and not have any. So I kind of figured, well, he's not using his external pharmacy the right way. And I thought, well, there's an external pharmacy, but we have our own body and brain chemistry that helps us with things like getting to sleep on time, will help our brain chemistry because it'll keep our emotions more regulated so we won't fall into, high emotions because of poor sleep. Body and brain chemistry. And it's simple things, so it's simple things like nutrition, hydration, and sleep is at number 2. And I know sleep is one of the most difficult things for many people with ADHD. There are rare exceptions, but it's really hard. And then if we're not sleeping, we're not exercising. And exercise is a fantastic source of agency over your brain chemistry to help you with performance. So I thought, I kind of need a list, because I know these things are important. And then when you start talking about exercise, you realize that breath work's really important, not just for your exercise, but also modulating which part of your brain's in charge. So I've got a little list. So this is about 11 or 12 things I keep adding of things that are important for it to help that body and brain chemistry work to, its best ability.
I would love to hear some. And I do want to share with you something that I've noticed about sleep for myself. If I don't sleep properly, then I do crave sugar, which throws off my diet, right? We all know that sugar's not great for us, and people with ADHD tend to crave sugar. But the one thing that I've noticed for my sleep, in addition to doing a brain dump, like just getting everything out, I like to sleep with a weighted blanket. I have found that people with ADHD, autism, anxiety, we do really, really well with that weighted blanket. So anyway, I can't wait to hear your list, but I always like to throw in my own.
That weighted blanket is a great example of engineering the environment, isn't it? You need that perception, the sensory calming. Great example. So I've got a little copy of my internal pharmacy here. So what I've done is I've created it like a little script pad. Because people tend to respect script pads. That if they get a prescription from their doctor, they respect that. So
Sure.
I've created one, and it looks like it has a lot of things on it. I'm happy to send you one, Jami. But the thing is, people go, oh, there's a lot on there. And there are a number of things on there, and I've kind of put them in rank order, but I would never expect anyone to do every one of them every day. It's kind of like a guideline. I had one of my clients, after about a couple of weeks, he said, I love it. He said, you can't help but feel better if you do most of these things most days. You don't have to do all of them. Or think of the 80-20 rule, but I think if you do 80% of these 80% of the time, can't help but feel better. And the
That's
simple things we're going to do
like,
anyway.
okay, so give me some examples.
With the top of the prescription pad is nutrition, hydration. Now, I know that sometimes, particularly when it's hotter, we might drink more water, but sometimes we don't. When it comes to winter, we don't drink as much, so we don't have that internal need, but we need the external reminder. So what the internal pharmacy script pad is a little working memory tool. Help us to remember the things that we need to do. Now, this is where understanding executive function is important. Executive functions are the suite of skills that help us execute tasks. So working memory is something that having good working memory helps us execute tasks. Oh, that's right. I've got to have some nutrition, hydration. I need to have my water bottle close to me. And the other thing I know about ADHD is they're so busy. People have these busy brains, but they might forget to eat, or they might be to the end of the day. And then one lady who was a very smart lady, corporate flyer, would get to the end of the day at 6 o'clock, try to feed her kids, and there was either nothing in the fridge or everything was frozen, which is very unappealing. So then they'd have to have takeaway, which is expensive. And well, nutrition, hydration, and I have some, on one side of the internal pharmacy are the things that we need, and the other column are the simple things we can do to address each of those items on the pharmacy. So I talk about 3 colors of nutrients daily, like green veggie, a yellow veggie, and maybe a white veggie or fruit, blueberries. At least 3 colors of nutrients. Sometimes when people have a lot of takeaway food, it might be hamburgers and chips or fried chicken and chips, and they're kind of all yellowy, whitey stuff. So it's about just taking a broader view and then reflecting on some of these things. It's actually not too hard to grab a zucchini or some broccoli and a carrot and some blueberries, but being intentional about it. So after nutrition, hydration is sleep, because whether we like it or not, sleep is the next most important thing we need to survival.
What do you tell people who have a brain that's constantly racing? How can they improve their sleep?
Well, it's again being intentional. So I like the work of Dr. Russell Barkley. He's a psychologist in the US who's a professor of psychiatry. So he talks about ADHD as sometimes being intention deficit disorder. So not just attention, but intention. So not having clear intention. I think we'll keep it all in our brain. I want to remember to do that. And that's not possible. We can't remember everything. So we need to have clear intentions. Again, which is what the internal pharmacy is about, clear intention.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to sidetrack you for a minute just because I have ADHD. I keep it real. I've heard that it's very common for people with ADHD to have food intolerances or sensitivities or pickiness. Have you heard that before?
I have heard that. And when I hear the food pickiness, I often think that can be a bit of an ASD trait as well, because there can be some traits. Some people don't have a full autism trait diagnosis, but they might have some traits. But I think the pickiness too could be with engagement. People with ADHD tend to, the way I like to talk about it is often the emotion is right, but the volume can be wrong. So they might be really engaged or driven by some foods more so. And that's because perhaps, is theorizing, the emotions take over. Oh, I really want to eat this food. But the executive function part of the brain that makes the more cognitive smart decisions isn't down-regulating it, saying, hey, no, we've got to put it on pause. And on a side note, this is where mindfulness comes in as well. It could be biological, it could be psychological. They all work together.
Sure. Okay, I know I took you off track. So what were some of the other internal pharmacy things on your script?
Well, the third one is exercise. So if we're not sleeping well enough, they kind of go in order. If we're not sleeping well enough, it's very hard to exercise. And the thing about exercise is it's one of the simplest things we can do to change the brain chemistry for alertness. Dr. John Ratey is another wonderful American psychiatrist, and he wrote a book in the I think, late 80s, early 90s called Spark. And he was one of the first people to have that conversation around the benefits of exercise and focus. What I love about exercise, if we can do that preferably in the morning, it can structure our day. It can be the starting block, for brain chemistry.
I have to interrupt you because I have noticed that if I don't do it in the morning, I always get distracted and it doesn't end up happening. And also, I know if you're familiar with David Gork, he started the ADD Coach Academy, and he is, he's up there, but he will not work as a coach with someone unless they're following an exercise regime. So that is how strongly he advocates. I think sometimes calling it exercise, especially for people with ADHD, is too hard of a word. And so it's just like parking a little further, moving your body and not being so regimented about it, but thinking, what can I do to be moving?
Movement and exercise is important. Movement. And there's even some great conversations coming out about exercise snacks. So you don't have to do a full 30-minute workout. It could be an exercise snack, like you just said, is park further away or run up a set of stairs, in your lunch break. It's simple. You don't even need space. I did try and regiment in some way, but was tricky. I'm still working on it. Setting an alarm every hour and doing 10 dips, or lunges right next to your workspace or at home, wherever you are. And the funny thing is, I thought, I want to do that one day. And I know these things can be simple, but they're not always easy. But then it takes intention. So it might be 10 squats next to your desk. And, if you can do that 8 times a day, that's the equivalent of doing a 30-minute workout in the morning.
Oh, that's sounding really good. I think it's something. I like this exercise snack.
It's a great idea. It can be anything. For me, I'm the same as you, Jami. If I don't do my exercise in the morning, it probably won't happen. The thing is, you kind of run out of resources, run out of time, life gets in the way. But for me, exercise in the morning is almost like a sacred time for me. I need it and I love it. And if it doesn't happen, then it won't happen. And it's important to me. It's one of my values.
I wish I loved it. It's a necessary evil in my life. I know that it's important and it is also one of my values, but I cannot tell you that I've crossed into love.
Well, one of the things I did was if I go for a walk, I listen to a podcast or I listen to an audio book. So I will not sit down and read a book. I can do it when I'm moving.
Me too.
As I've gotten a little bit older, I realized how important something like yoga is in the morning. And I used to fall into the trap of waiting for a yoga class I could get to. You don't need to. There are hundreds of fantastic yoga instructors. I can do it in my office right behind me if I need to. I prefer to go to the gym in the morning, and that's where I'll do it because no one can disturb me there. But it's about, again, engineering your environment. And I've changed the relationship with my gym membership as well. I used to just go for classes. And then I thought, there's different areas of the gym I can use outside of a class, like the weights area. I'm lucky if I go to a gym that's got an outdoor area. So I will go outside into the grassed area and do my yoga out there. It's beautiful. And it might only be a 10-minute yoga. It might be 10 minutes. But it's easy.
Good.
It's about working it out.
That's great. Any other tips you want to share, or maybe you want to have people reach out to you if they'd like to get that list, if you wanted to have them do that? Do you want to just give us your contact information so that it's something we know?
That's okay. You can reach out. We have a website. It's www.connectadhd.com. Simple as that. Connect.
So speaking of connection, you mentioned that your husband, Jonathan, is the partner with ADHD. How is that for you as a partner to have a partner with ADHD or spouse?
Well, interestingly enough, Jonathan didn't realize he had ADHD until he was working in the pharmaceutical industry. We were both nurses a long time ago. That's how we met. And John ended up working in a pharmaceutical company. First of all, he was working with the medication for anxiety and depression. And I went to another company. Then he came back to the original one. And long story short, started working in this area of ADHD. We had this is 15, maybe 16, 17 years ago now. We had no idea about ADHD. The conversation was still the old conversation back then. And John would come home really excited. Oh, it's actually real. ADHD is a real thing. Oh, and then we realized it's not just in boys. Oh, it's not just in kids. And the conversation grew. And he was at a conference one time and they were talking about the positive attributes of ADHD, and he realized that's him, And so he's a very positive, very creative, one of the most creative people on the planet, I think. And the thing is, that all made sense. For the first maybe 20 years of our marriage, I thought, why has he got so many hobbies? Why does he do this? Why is he so engaged with this? So it made a lot of sense. And then also, have kids, a couple of our kids have ADHD as well. So it's what you get used to. It's about engineering your environment. It's about understanding each other. It's about understanding the language of, it's not just attention deficit and hyperactivity, like the name would suggest. It's about understanding executive functions as well.
Yeah,
I'm an expert in engineering his environment.
That's awesome. Okay, so speaking of executive functioning, how do you think that understanding the framework of executive functioning is so central to living with ADHD?
Well, if we don't understand executive function, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that's kind of like a bunch of words that describe behaviors. It doesn't really speak to anything much more apart from things that have already happened. You haven't had your attention on something and you've been hyperactive. We need to change the conversation around ADHD to more in terms of looking at it through the lens of executive functioning. So when my clients come to me, I'll often ask them, hey, if you had to define ADHD to someone, what would you say? And they will often tell me what it feels like. They go, oh, it's like having 5 conversations in your head at once, or it's like being on a roller coaster, or it's, like wanting to watch 10 televisions all at the same time. And they can tell me what it feels like, but they don't often have a good working definition of what it is and what it means. So the way I like people to change that conversation with themselves is about its challenges with self-regulation and its self-regulation of the executive functions. So that takes it away from the shame and guilt about, forgetting things or losing things or being, not reading the room. And it puts it more into, oh, this is a framework of how my brain is fueled and what's working well and what isn't working well. So everyone with or without ADHD has more dopamine available to them when they're interested in something. And the thing about ADHD is that dopamine isn't as consistent as people without ADHD because we know it's about fueling. It's about the brain chemistry. And that's where we need to focus our attention. What's going to get the brain chemistry to do the work so the executive functions, which is the front part of our brain, gets to do its job. So it's that if we can get that part of the brain fueled, which is what the internal pharmacy is all about, then it can do its job properly and you can have the structure to know where you need to put, things in place. As I keep saying, engineering the environment, having the watch, having a speaking clock, having a calendar.
Yeah, I want to take a pause and talk a little bit more about engineering the environment. So just if you are listening to this podcast and you are enjoying it, which I hope you are, please like and share and comment. And we are going to come right back with Monica Hassall. Hey there, Grandma Has ADHD listeners. I'm your host, Jami Shapiro, and do I have some exciting news? My book, This Explains So Much, Understanding Undiagnosed ADHD, is now available on Amazon. My mom, Vicki, and I wrote this together. She's the original grandma who inspired this whole journey. I'm calling this the perfect is the enemy of done version, because if I waited until it was perfect, you'd never be holding it in your hands. This book is for us, those of us who've spent our whole lives feeling like we were too much or never quite enough. Inside, you'll find why you've always felt different, ADHD traits you didn't even know were ADHD traits, how to declutter without the shame spiral, and so much more about thriving with ADHD after 50. Here is the exciting part. Everyone who purchases the book gets free access to a virtual book club that my mom and I are hosting. We're going to share stories, laugh about our ADHD moments, and create that safe space where you can finally take off that girdle. When you read the book, you'll know what I mean, and just be yourself. Here's what to do. Head to Amazon, search This Explains So Much, Jami Shapiro, grab your copy, paperback or ebook, and visit grandmahasadhd.com to take the ADHD quiz and get your book club registration link. Understanding your ADHD isn't adding to your plate. It's finally understanding why your plate has always felt so full. I cannot wait to see you at the book club and hear your stories. And if the book resonates, please leave an Amazon review, as well as for this podcast, to help other women find their light bulb moments. Thank you for being part of this community. This book exists because of all of you. Ever wondered why helping a loved one declutter feels like speaking different languages? I did, especially with my mom. It wasn't until I founded Silver Linings Transitions, helping San Diego seniors organize and move for over a decade, that I discovered why. We all experience clutter differently, and for those of us with ADHD, it's a whole other world. If you are listening in the San Diego area and feeling stuck with moving, paperwork, photos, or home organization, our team at Silver Linings Transitions gets it. We understand ADHD's unique challenges, and we won't just help you get organized. We'll create sustainable systems that finally stick. Schedule a consultation with our team today at 760-522-1624. That's 760-522-1624, or find us at silverliningstransitions.com. So we are back with Monica Hassall of Connect ADHD in Brisbane, Australia. And I asked a little bit more about creating the environment. I don't remember the words that you used, but to support yourself with that internal pharmacy when you have ADHD. And especially, and I think we should define executive functioning, just because a lot of our listeners, this may be the first time they're hearing this podcast, and we throw these terms around, but they're not new to us as ADHD coaches. So why don't you describe executive function and executive functioning to the audience?
I'm very happy to. As I said, John and I are both nurses. We knew nothing about executive function 20, 30, 40 years ago when we started nursing. Executive function, first, it's good to understand the brain. Our brain is pretty complex, and different areas of the brain have different jobs. So one area of the brain might be for listening. One different area of the brain might help us with understanding language or seeing colors. But the front part of our brain, right behind where our eyes are, that's the part of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex. So at the front, and that's the area of the brain that manages a suite of skills. That's where the skills take place. So executive function, they're a bunch of skills, and they generally all work together that help us plan, organize, prioritize, manage time, help us manage our emotion, help us manage our attention. That's the job of the front part of our brain. So it's a more advanced part of the brain. It gets wired when we learn things through experience. So it's simply understanding suite of skills that help us execute tasks. That's why they're called executive function. And once we know that, we can do something about them.
Right. So that's like time management or emotional regulate. I'm just trying to, it's funny. I wrote a book. I mentioned all of them, and then I'm blank when I have to go into, but organizing is a really big challenge for those of us. It's just
done, Jami. It took me years to sort of understand it. What I've done is I've created cards for my clients so they can understand it better. So what I'm showing Jami is a little card I put together with 7 executive functions on there. Creating these cards is a way that I help my clients engineer their environment. They can remember what the executive functions are. It's why I made a card for the internal pharmacy. So I want people to be able to remember these executive functions, their point of performance. Here's another thing that goes with engineering the environment. ADHD is always about the point of performance. What's happening right now? What am I remembering? What am I forgetting? Where are my emotions? Where is my attention? Is it the right time? What little naughty habit have I got into that I need to not be doing so I can do the thing I'm meant to be doing, or I'd like to be doing, or I need to be doing? So that's why engineering the environment is important, because that ADHD is about that point of performance.
You had shared that understanding our values is a motivator for self-care. Can you explain that a little bit?
I love the notion of people being more aware of their values. So we need to actually, if you haven't already done a values exercise, I would highly recommend you stop and do one.
Mm.
So a values, I've got a simple one that I send to my clients, and I've got an orange piece of paper with like 110 words on it. What I want
Mhm.
them to do is circle everything that means something to them, narrow it down to the top 10, and then narrow it down to the top 3 or 4, so you know what your values are.
Mhm.
The reason why I do that is understanding your values can help you make good decisions.
That's so true. And I mean, I even did that as I was looking at my life and what were my values going to be, not just for my company, but for me as a mom. And as I walked through life, we both shared that exercise was a value. So it's like,
Mhm.
where does that fall in our day? If we haven't made time for it, is it really a value? Because I think we make time for the things that are important to us.
Well, as we age, we need to value our health because we do nothing without our health. And it is harder to stay active if you're not healthy. That's why the things in the internal pharmacy are really important: nutrition, hydration, sleep, and exercise. That's why
Mhm.
they're so important. If we know what our values are, it gives us some direction to know what are the actions that will support my values. So if health is a value, it's easy to think, well, then I need to take the time to put some exercise into my week somewhere.
Mhm.
One of my clients values beauty. And when she went on a walk one time, first time she went for a walk with her values in mind, she saw this beauty of mother duck swimming down a creek with the little tiny ducks. And she thought, oh, that's so beautiful. Hang on, I don't see this in my office. Our values can help us make good decisions and keep us rewarded.
That's great. You said in some of the stuff that you sent to me before our interview that self-care is not a dirty word. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, it's one of those things that we can start our day in autopilot and then just go, 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 and then get to bed whatever time at night and then just do it all again. So what we need to do is understand the value of what self-care is. And as we know, it's not just bubble baths and candles. Self-care might be getting to bed earlier. People say, oh, but I need my me time. That's like late. But me time might also be getting good sleep.
Mhm.
So that can be self-care. Sometimes people see self-care as being selfish, and it's not. Self-care is about maintaining your body and brain chemistry to do what you need to do.
I I'm gonna I'll share with you because since my understanding of ADHD, I have definitely altered the way that I go through life, and I'm now paying attention to my energy level. And when I am doing something out of obligation for somebody else that I don't really want to be doing, then that is zapping my energy. And one of the brilliant things about my ADHD is the things that I can accomplish when I'm motivated and inspired. And so I honored that. And then I also have to honor the need to pull back, which I never gave myself permission to do. Not this past weekend, but the weekend before. I had finished the book. I had done a couple presentations at conferences, and I'd hit that wall. And old me would have felt guilty if I hadn't kept going, going, going. And new me was like, you know what? I'm gonna sit on the couch and binge watch. It doesn't matter what I binge watch. Can't remember the name. It was good though.
Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
finally am not feeling guilty, and that has been a
Yeah.
huge blessing of understanding my ADHD.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anything else you want to share before we say goodbye to each other, at least for this episode?
I think most important thing is that we only have one brain and one body, and as far as we know, one life.
I love that you
Yeah.
said that, but I think we have more, but that's a whole other
Yes,
conversation.
and that's okay. But we only have one right now.
Yep.
So we're in charge of this, or we're more in charge than we know. So, as I said, if we don't have clear intentions, then how can we have the days that we want to have? A lot of times people might have regrets about, oh, I didn't really do this today and do that today. Having transparency of what our day needs to look like, which is planning, that's one of the executive functions. Self-awareness and self-monitoring, that's one of the executive functions on my card. If we don't self-monitor, how can we keep in check? And don't burn out. Like, burnout is a huge conversation around neurodiversity. And burnout happens when we literally get drained because that self-monitoring hasn't occurred. So we're important. We need to be there for ourselves. We may or may not need to show up for parents or partners or kids or friends or work people. So we're in charge.
I love that. And that was a message that I absolutely needed to hear. And I think the listeners need to hear. I mean, I used to feel so guilty if I wasn't doing something productive with my time. And, again, self-care for me now is saying, you know what? No, Jami, it's okay to pause. It's okay to veg on the couch. So,
And mindfulness is one of my things as well. And I have one quick quote that I just love. I think you'll really like. One of my favorite quotes. I heard it about 20, 30 years ago. It didn't make any sense to me at the time. Now I know more about mindfulness. It's better to do nothing than to waste time. And most people think that doing nothing is wasting time, but it's not. Mindfulness is bring our attention to the current moment.
That was deep. I'm going to have to give it some thought.
Yeah, it's a sleeper.
Yeah. And it's absolutely going to be one of those things that hits me in the middle of the night, like when I, ruminating and but that's what she meant.
Yeah. Better to do nothing than to waste time.
I love it. Thank you so much for being on the Grandma Has ADHD podcast and for your enthusiasm. I loved the email that you sent me. It always makes me feel good when I know that I'm speaking to a kindred spirit. And anyway, I do hope you have ADHD because my favorite people have ADHD. And I always tell people it's a compliment. If I ask if you have ADHD, please take that as a compliment because we are brilliant.
Exactly.
And all of those things. So anyway, any final words before I say goodbye?
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast, being able to share this message with think's important, and also for doing the work that you do. It's amazing. I love it.
I appreciate it. And thank you for doing the work that you're doing as well. I can't wait to get the internal pharmacy list. Well, as I like to end the podcast, it is never too late to understand yourself better and to make the rest of your life the best of your life. Thanks so much for listening to the Grandma Has ADHD podcast. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The hosts, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.